Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is under increasing pressure over multiple controversies surrounding his decision-making as leader of the Pentagon, over both the deadly second strike on that suspected drug boat in the Caribbean and his handling of classified military information in a group chat. Today, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the commander who ordered that double-tap strike on an alleged drug trafficking boat back in September were on Capitol Hill today briefing lawmakers as members of Congress demand answers and increased transparency about the legality of that second strike, which some have said could be a war crime. Following that closed-door briefing, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee expressed deep concern after seeing the video of the incident.
But what I saw in that room was one of the most troubling things I've seen in my time in public service. Any American who sees the video that I saw will see the United States military attacking shipwrecked sailors. Bad guys, but attacking shipwrecked sailors. Now, there's a whole set of contextual items that the Admiral explained. Yes, they were carrying drugs. They were not in the position to continue their mission in any way. People will someday see this video and they will see that that video shows, if you don't have the broader context, an attack on shipwrecked sailors.
But Republicans like Tom Cotton, the top Republican on the Senate Intel Committee, disagreed, saying the video showed the strike was justified.
The first strike, the second strike, and the third and the fourth strike on September 2nd were entirely lawful and needful, and they were exactly what we'd expect our military commanders to do.
What exactly did you see in terms of the video of the second strike? Were there survivors?
I saw two survivors trying to flip a boat loaded with drugs bound for the United States back over so they could stay in the fight.
Speaking yesterday in the Oval Office, President Trump said he would support releasing the video of that controversial follow-up strike. Amid that controversy, Secretary Hegseth is also facing renewed scrutiny for the information he shared on a Signal group chat. You might remember this. This happened back in March about a pending military operation in Yemen. Today, the Pentagon Inspector General released a long-awaited report on the role the defense secretary played in the so-called Signalgate saga. In it, investigators concluded Hegseth violated military regulations, writing, quote, "The secretary's actions created a risk to operational security that could have resulted in failed U.S. mission objectives and potential harm to U.S. pilots." The report also says Secretary Hegseth declined to be interviewed as a part of the probe, instead providing just a written statement to investigators. Joining me now is NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, who is on Capitol Hill for us. So, Courtney, break down these different reactions that we are hearing from lawmakers based on which side of the aisle they're on.
Yeah, so it's split down the aisle, frankly, Kristen. On the Republican side, they are saying there's nothing to see here and that they believe that the orders were all lawful and legal. On the Democrat side, we are hearing about great concerns after seeing the full video that has become the subject of so much consternation and conversation over the last week since that blockbuster report out of the Washington Post that there was, in fact, a second and then additional follow-on strikes after against a boat on September 2nd. This was the first time the U.S. military struck one of these alleged drug boats in the Caribbean Sea. Now, we have heard from a number of lawmakers today who've come out of these briefings. The briefings themselves, of course, are classified in a secure facility, so we've not heard anything from either Admiral Bradley, he was the JSOC commander at the time, he's now the head of U.S. Special Operations Command, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, who is alongside him in these classified briefings. But we have heard from a number of senators and representatives on both sides of the aisle. I had an exchange with Senator Kuhn, who was one of the members who was briefed on this, and here's a little of what he had to say. Senator Cotton, that the boat was flipped over and the survivors are trying to flip it back right side. Is that your understanding?
That's a fair characterization.
Was the strike after the survivors had climbed back in the boat? Or did they ever climb back in the boat? It feels unclassified to me.
I'm trying to avoid making something unclassified that's currently classified, to the best of my understanding. Senator Cotton and I came out with different understandings of what we saw.
So that was one of the new facts that we learned here today from these senators. It was Senator Cotton who first said that the boat was actually flipped over and the survivors were in the water, and that was evident on the video. What's still unclear, though, Kristen, is were they actually trying to flip it over and still use it as a boat to continue on with their mission? We've also learned, according to several sources familiar, that in fact they were in some sort of communication with a mothership, and that may have factored into the ultimate decision to take that second strike.
Well, Courtney, what an excellent job you did there pressing Senator Coons. Well done, I must say. Let me ask you where this goes from here, because we know that there have been calls for this to become a public hearing. These were closed-door briefings that happened today. What are you hearing about any potential momentum to continue to push for that?
Yeah, there are still senators and members who are calling for open hearings, but we're not hearing about anything imminent on that front. You know, there is one thing that I have noticed is a pretty consistent line coming out, no matter which side of the aisle the senator or the representative is on, is they are all very supportive of Admiral Bradley, Admiral Mitch Bradley, the head of SOCOM, saying that he had a difficult decision and that he made the decision in the moment. One of the things that we learned is that he did actually have a judge advocate general, a JAG, in the room with him during this mission. That would be standard, but that's been one of the questions that we've been trying to figure out is, did he have legal counsel when he ultimately made the decision to carry on not just the second strike, but the third and the fourth strikes that ultimately ended up sinking that boat and killing all 11 people on board?
Well, that's a significant revelation there as well, Courtney. Let me ask you about the other matter facing Secretary Hegseth, his use of the platform Signal to discuss pending military operations. Secretary Hegseth responded to the report, writing on social media, quote, total exoneration. But, Court, that's not what the report says, right? How big of a firestorm is this?
You know, we've been trying to figure out what exonerates him exactly. Here's the facts, as we first heard about yesterday, and now the report confirms. That is that it found that the information that was transmitted by then head of Central Command, General Eric Kurilla, was classified as secret no foreign. That means secret, not for distribution to any foreign nationals. Now, Secretary Hegseth took that information at that level of classification, put it on his personal phone in the unclassified Signal app, the communications app, and transmit it not only to other members of the administration, but then to other people like his wife, his brother, and some other friends of his. At no point is there any proof that that information was declassified. The one thing that the report does say, though, is the secretary is a declassifying authority. He has the ability to classify, but there's no indication that he actually did that. I don't see how the secretary and those around him are classifying that as an exoneration, but they continue to post that on social media today, Kristen.
All right, Courtney Kube, phenomenal reporting as always. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.